What's going on, guys? Army-Firedawg is back again, and today I actually have a review for you of the Dekoni Audio Blue. This is their Fostex T50RP mod, and it's actually the only modification that Fostex actually makes in-house. I just found that out recently, and that's actually a really cool thing. But anywho, so as always, let's jump into the construction of which, and then work our way down from there. So the construction of the Dekoni Audio Blue is fairly standard of mainstream headphones. It's a lot of plastic built into it as terms of the exterior, like the cup here, and just its general appearance. Now, the frame right here, as well as the interior frame underneath this thin cloth, is actually an aluminum-like material. So it is quite light, but it is very durable. I don't really have any worries about it breaking or something like that on you. An interesting thing, or depending which way you look at it, is the Dekoni is actually written upside down, because the standard headphone, when people come to me, like when I'm demoing headphones to them, they'll ask, how do I know which way is left and right? My general response is if there's words printed on the top, that's how it goes on your head. And the reason for that is for the company can market their own product to not just who has purchased it, but everyone around them. Because when you're, like, say you're in a conversation or you just want to have the headphones on your head, you can rest your headphones like this. Now what this does is, on the flip side, people around can read the Dekoni logo. It's not really a big thing whatsoever. It's just something I've kind of grew to enjoy of manufacturers who do put their name on the top of the headband. But moving on, it's been on too long for that. A big issue I do have, and it's something I also had with Bayer dynamic models, is that the aux cable that sends a signal path through the headphones is right here. I can easily see this getting tangled up or nicked on something and then breaking. I never like to see this. Of course, in this headphones design, I really don't see anywhere they could have put it, unless they put like a sleeve here. But it's something I do think you should be, or those of you who want to get the Dekoni Blue, to be weary of. And you will have to take care of that, not to nick it on something, because those do stick out a good ways. Moving down a little bit. The pads are replaceable. The one you see equipped right now is the Dekoni Elite Hybrid Pad, which is a mixture between leather and velour, and these are actually angled. See if my camera will be adjusted right there. There you go, you can see it really good. These have a nice angle to them. I love seeing angled pads about as much as I love seeing angled drivers. To me, I think that improves the imaging. I think things just sound more realistic, and I can tell where they are on the soundscape better just by putting a slight angle in where the sound comes to you. That's just a personal thing. I don't know if there's any research behind it, but it's just something I personally experience. The other pads they did include are the Dekoni Elite Velour. This is all of velour pads, and this is actually a pretty firm velour. So when you want these are actually firmer than the hybrids. So when these are on your head, and if you want like a firm feel, you don't want a lot of give, you will actually love these quite a bit. They have the same comfort as velour, but they don't have that standard kind of give that a lot of velour pads do have. So I do like these really well. The cable is actually detachable, which is always a wonderful thing to have. And what's cool about this particular one is it's actually a locking cable. You can see there's two little slits right there, and then there's two slits right here that correspond. So when you put these in, you put it in at a 90-degree angle, just like so, and then twist it, and now it is locked. It will not come out. So I do like seeing that. Now, as for the cable itself, it's actually not microphonic. There was little to no microphonics throughout the entire time, regardless if I was sitting at home in the chair I'm in right now listening to the music, or if I was just out and about, have it plugged onto my mobile, and it would be brushing against my clothes. I didn't really have, or that I know of, I never heard any microphonics or any kind of interference with that. So it's a standard looking cable, but at least it is shielded with something on the inside to keep that microphonics down. The headphone termination is just a standard 2.5mm aux, so it should be easily replaceable. And then the source termination is your 1/4" jack. And as I mentioned in the unboxing video, it does come with, and I'm very glad for this, a 1/4" to 3.5mm adapter that just slips right over. So you can plug this mobily. Now before, this is probably more on the sound. I think in my written review I did cover this in the sound section. However, this can be driven mobily. It's only 50 ohms of impedance, and I think the net sensitivity is 92, I think, off the top of my head. Now, initially reading that, you're like, oh, yeah, these are super efficient. I mean, yeah, an amp usually always makes things sound better, but this can easily be driven from my phone. Now, my LG V20 has a wonderful DAC, not so much of an amp. It'll do, but it's not the best amp in the world. But it was maxed out. Like, I had to max the volume out to put these to a comfortable level. Now, that is without the... I use the amp Power Amp Pro for my music. It has a built-in preamp setting, so when that's maxed out, then you can listen to these at about 2/3 max volume before they're comfortable. So they do take more juice than what they take credit for. Now, when you plug these into an amplifier, whether it be the Fostex HPA4BL, if I'm remembering it correctly, or one of the desktop amps I have here that put out a lot more power, then yes, you're going to notice a notable improvement. But again, I'll touch on that here after a while. Moving on down to the comfort. The comfort of the Dekoni Audio Blues it's okay. The pads, I really don't have any complaints with the pads. I think they're very soft. They have just the right amount of pressure to it, not too much give, not too much firmness, just that Goldilocks zone of pressure on the pads. But it's the headphone themselves have quite a bit more clamping force than what I personally like. So when these are on my head, there seems to be a lot of pressure right around this back side of my head. And I have noticed that, though, yes, I have worn these for several hour sessions, I do often, like every 20 or so minutes, have to kind of adjust them to find the new spot of focus on my ears, or my head, rather. It usually likes to put a lot of pressure right around here. That does get uncomfortable and adds some fatigue quite a bit. So, though the comfort isn't bad, and actually I'll notice real quick before I go too bad, even though this headband is like padding is non-existent, you can see how thin it is. I surprisingly didn't have any issues with it. But getting back on track, I think it's just the design of the headphone itself and some people will love the tight clamping force. I just think it's a little bit too much for my personal tastes. This is the first Fostex T50RP product I've ever listened to, modded or not. And I'm sure several of you have. And you kind of know what you're getting into with that. But for me personally, I just think the clamping force makes these a little bit too uncomfortable for extended durations. Now, moving on to the sound quality is probably what y'all care the most about. So this is my very first ever Fostex T50RP product I've listened to, as I have mentioned, regardless if it be modded or not. I have listened to several planar magnetic products, so I had a slight bias going into these. Not really a bias, a preemptive impression, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, about what these would generally sound like. But when listening to these, I was quite surprised by the level of bloat in the bass. And I don't know if that's the correct term or not, but it kind of bubbles out. But bubbly doesn't really describe bass too well. But it just kind of, when I listen to a very bassy track, it just kind of, the bass, and this is very contradicting, I know, but it's the only way I've been able to describe it. So the bass still has that level of control and depth that I've grown to know and love with planners. But it has to be a way it's tuned, because it just bloats out. And that's the best way I can describe it. And I've listened to a couple songs in my written review. So it's tracks I've used before, but they're bassy. But when you listen to them through the Dekoni Blue, the bass kind of a little bit. It's not necessarily bad. It just adds it's an interesting sound to experience. It's definitely fun. I will say that. It's a very fun headphone to listen to. A good friend of mine actually has the Blues himself, and he likes to compare it as a complementary headphone to his HD800S, because S is reference sound, very smooth, very flat, and then this thing has quite V-shaped. Like, it's a notable V-shaped curve when listening to it. So it's very fun, and I think at bass especially complements the 800s, kind of lack thereof bass. But it's fun. It's just different. Now, when I first got these, after I listened to music for a little bit, I plugged them into my game. So when I listen to these most often through a game is either Destiny 2 or Fortnite. Now Fortnite through these are miserable. They are absolutely miserable. Now, real quick, if there are differences, again, they sent me 2 pads, the Elite Hybrids, which came equipped, and the Elite Velours. When there is a notable difference, I will bring that up. Now, when listening on the Fortnite, Destiny wasn't too bad, but Fortnite has a already biased bass push in its system. I don't know what word I'm looking for. And that is really accented on the Dekoni Blues. And it's not, at least for me, it was not enjoyable to listen to. That bass was just overwhelming on the Blues. Now, when I put the Elite Velour pads, that did tone down the bass actually a fair bit. It kind of mellowed that frequency out some. It didn't kill the bass. It didn't kill the sound of the headphones by any stretch of that word or imagination. But it mellowed it out quite a bit. So anytime I would play Fortnite, I would put the Velour pads on, because with the Elite Hybrids, it was just not pleasant to play. Now, going to movies and TV shows were awesome. That, especially those of the action genre with that emphasized bass, not quite to the Fortnite's level, but to that explosions, gunshots, some general action movies. They sounded really good and enjoyable on the Dekoni Blues. The narrow soundstage, I mean, there are some scenes that I wish I could hear more vast out, that I've kind of got accustomed to listening on the HD800S or my Oppo PM1s. So it is a much narrower sound, but it makes that action scenes, like the fighting scenes, much more intimate, like right there in your face. So I do like these quite a bit for whether it be like anime or movies, stuff like that. Now, let me talk about more of the individual aspects. So maybe I can describe the sound a little bit better than just my summary that I usually just like to start with. So starting with the treble. The treble on the Dekoni Blues, regardless if you're listening to the Elite Hybrid or Velour pads, I really didn't have any issues. They had that same kind of sparkle and extension that planners have come to know, and the treble on these actually sounded very similar to that of the Oppo PM1s. Had great extension. They did roll a bit way up high, especially if you're using the Velour pads. If you're using the Velour pads, it is very similar to the PM1 treble, how it rolls fairly early on. But the hybrid pads has really good extension, and it has that nice energy transfer to it. Like if you're listening to, and I put a couple pieces in my written review of violin pieces, and I love using the violin because it'll really test the headphone's ability to control the really high peaks, especially those that really get into the energy, like really fast paced. A lot of emotion in the violin. One of the pieces I do know I use, because I use it for pretty much everything ever since I found it, is A Moonfield Sky. I never knew who the artist is, but it's a very sad, very emotional violin piece with a piano accenting the violin. And with the Dekoni Blues, all that emotion, the sadness of that piece was portrayed very nicely. I didn't feel the violin strings were harsh at all, like when something I've never had any experience with planners at all, but they never struggled to really get that higher pitched. Sometimes with headphones that don't do too well in the treble, especially on that piece, it'll really stress. Like you can hear it it just doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound smooth on violins or a high piercing treble piece. Not so much at all with these. Now, the mid-range is not what I personally enjoy. As I said earlier, it is a very V-shaped sound curve, and as y'all probably know, I'm not too big on the V-shapes myself. The vocals do come through very clear. They're very, and from my ears, accurate. It's just they're really withdrawn in the soundstage. Like, here you have the instruments and all the pieces that are supposed to accent the artist. And I used a couple songs from Adele to show this. But she just sounds so far back when she's supposed to be the focus. And then here's all the instruments right here. And she's back here. It doesn't really sound, to me, that good. I understand the draw of a V-shaped sound because it's very fun, it's very bassy and very accented with the trebles and stuff like that. It's just not for me personally. It just didn't, again, for artists and acoustic music I listen to, it just doesn't sound full to me personally. Now, the bass is, I think, where they focused on the Dekoni because it is quite forward, and I would say the bass is more prevalent than even the treble on it, but it does have that bloat to it. It's still tight. It's still, and I know that contradicts itself saying it's bloated, but it's controlled and tight, but it still has that same depth. Like, those of you who like some bass in your music, I think you'll like the Dekoni Blues. Now, it's not a super bassy headphone. It is not. It is not a super bassy headphone, but the bass is pretty satisfying listening through these. And I use Animals by Martin Garrix and or Freaks by Timmy Trumpet on my written review. It's linked down here, so whatever I use, it'll be right there for you. But both of those songs, very bassy piece, but it shows the bloat in this really well. Now, in case you don't like, oh, that's not a well-mastered piece, I also throw Adele in there as well. Of course, I highly recommend, I always link YouTube videos in the reviews just for ease of use so you can find it yourself, but I always recommend you listen to it on a much better source. But other than that, the bass is not too bad. It's very fun. It's just not as, I just don't like that bloat. That, for me personally, and this is just my opinion, not necessarily the headphones bass, for those who like it, you're going to really enjoy it. I just didn't care too much to it. It just sounded off to me personally. But to conclude, guys, the Dekoni, it looks bland, and even though it has plastic cups, I don't have any worries about the construction of these. The aluminum is pretty nice, it's lightweight, and I'm pretty sure, I haven't tested it, but I believe these can take quite a few drops, so they should last you quite a few years. If taken care of appropriately, of course. And then both the pads I talked about on here, I really enjoyed the pads. I would like to try the Dekoni pads on more products, because it was actually quite interesting going back and forth between the two. If you wanted more of a subdued sound, it didn't alter the overall sound characteristics of the Dekoni Blue, but going from the Elite Hybrid pads that are come equipped with them to the Elite Velours, it just mellowed it out a little bit. It made it a little bit more neutral sounding. It still was very V-shaped, but it just narrowed down to just a little bit. Kind of tamed it, I guess is a good word for it. But anyway, guys, it's been quite a long video. I didn't think it'd be this long. But if you have any questions, or if there's something I may have missed that you would like me to clarify more, please hit me up in the comments down below. I will absolutely reply to each and every one of you. And a question I do have for you is, have you ever experimented with altering pads? And if so, what's your experience with it? I've changed cables a couple times. I've tried a few aftermarket cables, but this is, from my head and my memory, this is the first time I've tried any kind of specialized pads or aftermarket pads, and going back and forth the difference the sound makes. No, I have, yes, with the Oppos, they have the velour pads, which mine didn't come with, but they have the lambskin leather, and then the Beyerdynamics had the velour and a kind of leather-esque pad, a faux leather pad. But for those, I personally couldn't hear much of a difference or anything notable. With these, you do hear some. So I'd like to know your experience as well. But anyway, guys, as always, my name is Army-Firedawg. It has truly, truly been a pleasure, but most importantly, and please I ask my friends, stay safe.